Hi there, I'm Eleanor Saitta.
And I'm Johanna Koljonen. And today we're going to talk about a nifty new piece of Larp theory that describes something that literally every one of you already knows how to do, namely LARPing. We're not today talking about LARPing as, for instance, creating a cool story or portraying a character in a way that is convincing to yourself. Those are choices that you can make to direct your play, but in another LARP culture, you might make some other choices. We're going to talk today about the level beneath. We're trying to describe the activities that you will do no matter what kind of LARP culture you're from. What's happening in our minds as we play, and how does that affect our player actions? The question we're trying to answer is, what do we do when we LARP? To help describe these processes, we're going to introduce two concepts, map and loop. The map is the structure in the player's minds of what is going on in the LARP. It's the current status of the fictional reality and the player's place inside it. The map is a metaphor for how we organize all the information that we have about what's going on. Things such as, what physical areas are we playing in? What do they represent in the fiction? Who are all these characters? Why are they here? What's their culture? What do they want? Who am I playing? And what does that person want? What do I think this LARP is about, and how interested am I in engaging with those themes? How long to the end of play? How long to the next meal? Am I tired? What's going on in the room right now? What were my previous interactions with this specific person, and how do I interpret their character's goals and their goals as a player? All of this and much, much more is mapped out in your mind, and it's constantly updated as you play. It sounds like a lot. It is a lot. But as humans, we're pretty good at this, since these kinds of maps are essentially how we organize information in our daily life as well. So that's the map. The other concept is also fundamentally very simple. It's called the loop. An action loop has 4 steps: observing and understanding the situation you're in, planning and evaluating the possible actions you might take, deciding on what to do, and performing the action. In other words, doing the thing. Then you observe again to see what has changed, what were the consequences of your choice, and the loop starts over. Running a loop like this is almost instantaneous, and we don't feel the steps, or we rarely do. Basically, the loop is also a metaphor. It's a metaphor for your decision-making process. Now, in our chapter in the Solmukohta book, we go through all of this in a lot more detail, explaining how it works step by step and what parts apply before, during, and after your LARP. But today, we're going to introduce the map briefly, then talk a little bit about how you make the map and how you use it in your decision loops. And importantly, we're also going to talk about motivation and agency. Motivation drives what kinds of actions you're interested in pursuing, and your agency determines what kinds of actions you feel it's possible for you specifically to do.
So, as we mentioned before, the map is your internal image of everything going on in the Larp. Maybe you ask yourself, how does this map get into my brain? The answer is simple. You make it yourself with the help of the Larp's designers. Before the Larp even starts, and perhaps even before you sign up, you start sketching out the landscape of the map in your mind. What is the world of the fiction? What's the situation of the Larp? What kinds of activities will be available, broadly speaking? What kind of simulation mechanics will be used? You will get many answers from the organizing team. You might also do your own research, like reading up on a historical period, watching a movie, or talking to people who have played previous LARPs by the same team. By the time you receive or create the character that you will play, you have probably done a bit of sketching already. But now the sketching starts in earnest. The character's situation is a helpful filter for finding out what information will be most relevant to you as you play. Maybe you can ignore the names of gods or fictional elements, but things like, for example, the names of your children should probably be part of your map. Then, as you arrive on site, you can add a lot of things to your map, like where your room is, which faces go with which names, how are your co-players feeling today, and what kinds of play are they interested in exploring. The sketch of your map is still hypothetical, it's an outline. To be able to play, it needs to become alive. And the map is not a passive picture, it's a real-time map, like the Marauders map in Harry Potter, or a map on a ship constantly being updated by the radar. It shows what's currently happening to the best of your knowledge. So at the beginning of the runtime, or just before the Larp starts, you start internally doing what we have called warming up the map or awakening the map. You start to interact with the others in character. You're trying out your portrayal of your character for real, and you're doing some first interactions with your co-players in the fictional situation. The beginning of a LARP is often a little awkward, and everyone is warming up their maps at the same time. Your mind is probably full of questions as you start playing. Can I trust that I will be treated with the fictional status that comes with my character? Can we talk about the backstory in detail? Or do I have to keep it general because my closest co-player hasn't memorized it? And 1,000 other questions. But soon, in a few minutes or a few hours, the map is alive. And at this time, you have a clear idea of where your character is and what kind of choices you feel you can make about what will happen next. From this point of, the map updates pretty automatically. We're now in the flow of play. Every time our characters interact in any way, we as players are constantly sharing with each other information about the maps, not just our characters' mood and goals, but also our understanding of what is happening in the fiction, as well as player information about possible play directions and small bids to participate in interactions. And reading these cues is a player skill that we get better at the more we LARP. But there can also be misunderstandings and disagreements. For instance, disagreements between players about what is true inside the fiction. These are map conflicts. We build these elaborate maps based on very little data, so they will not always match, and maybe we were given conflicting information by accident. How to negotiate these conflicts, both in character and out of character, sometimes with the help of an organizer, is not a player skill. But actually, it's surprisingly rare to end up with big map conflicts. And that suggests that the skill set in play here is pretty similar to how we navigate new situations in real life. After the LARP ends, we narrativize the story of our experience by telling ourselves, and often also each other, about our character journey. Our map is no longer alive, but we can sort of scribble in the margins based on information the others give us. And sometimes others tell us about their LARP based on their maps, and that stuff is completely irrelevant to our own experience, or it would change the meaning of what happens so much it breaks our own narrative. And when that's the case, we usually ignore that input entirely. And that's okay. Our co-players only interact directly with our map making during the runtime of the LARP.
Now let's move on to using and updating the map, which happens through the action loop. The action loop consists of 4 steps. In the observation and understanding stage, you use all of your senses to scan your surroundings, as well as your own physical and emotional state. Your goal here is to figure out what's happening, how you're doing, and how you're feeling. Also, you're looking at what seems to be going on with other players nearby. What are their characters doing, and what kind of emotions are they signaling, either consciously or unconsciously? You compare all of that data with what's in your map, and you update it with all the new information. But you also try to understand it. You use your literacy skills. You look at what's happening with the power dynamics, what kinds of play opportunities or plot directions are moving around you. You also look at where the LARP themes are represented in the space or in actions, and so on. Any new information here automatically updates your map. In the next step, you plan and assess. That means you reflect on what actions are possible and what actions are desirable and acceptable. That is, which of the possible things would be interesting or meaningful for you to do, and which of them are acceptable within the norms of your life, the expectations of the LARP, and within the play culture of the ensemble that you're part of. Here, it also matters a lot who your character is, since most play cultures would expect in one way or another that you'll stay loyal to at least some aspects or goals of that character. Now, at this point, there are probably still several actions that are both desired and acceptable and appropriate for your character. Usually, now you need to evaluate what's achievable, because you only have so much time and energy to use during play, and you have to take that into account. Although, in the heat of the moment, we're honestly not that great at managing our energy. However, we try. Taking all of this into account, you might still have several options, and as part of this process, you start running outcome evaluations. Which action creates the most interesting or satisfying play directions? Where are you going to find new possibilities if that's what you're looking for, both for yourself and for players around you? All of this also plays into your decision. Now, from all of this, at some point, you pick an action. That's the decision point, and you perform it. Now, you're actually running a bunch of different loops at different timescales at the same time. We'll get to that in a moment. But in a very short-term loop, the action could be whether you decide to spend a few more seconds groaning before you die. In a longer-term loop, the action might be that you decide to go through with the wedding, but you're also going to find a way for your character to seek her death before the end. Many of these steps are completely automatic, and it's often only the longest timescales where we're even aware of doing them. And there are shortcuts too. Many of us have enough experience of what kind of play that we enjoy that we have internal rules, heuristics, that let us eliminate the need for planning in specific situations. A heuristic could be, for instance, that if you're playing a rules-heavy vampire game and more than 2 people are about to get into a fight, you're going to back out of the room because you don't like getting stuck counting combat points. Or it could be that whenever your character is faced with a choice, you're going to pick the option that leads to the worst outcome because that's more interesting for you.
Before we talk about the timescales, I'd like to return for a moment to this idea of possible, desirable, and achievable actions. What you can think of doing, what you want to do, and what you feel you're able to do. And 2 really important terms here are motivation and agency. Your motivations are the reasons that shape your actions. They can be individual or communal, and have to do either with the LARP experience itself or with factors outside of the LARP. Individual motivations can, for example, be experiencing powerful emotions, wanting to win, temporarily escaping into another world, or perhaps challenging yourself to be a good leader under pressure. Motivations outside of the play situation could be, for example, understanding something better, making new friends, or even increasing your own social status in a community. Communal goals, they are things like making experiences better for others, helping to build a community with certain values, or exploring and developing a genre or a fiction together. The characters we play, they will also have goals for their actions, but the player goals and the character goals are not necessarily aligned. It can, however, be a player goal to stay loyal to your character. If that's your goal, part of what motivates you to LARP is finding meaningful actions within very specific character constraints. But it can also be a player goal to experience the satisfaction of strategy and competition and bending the character to fit that goal. Those are questions of play culture and aesthetics, and this model should work irrespectively of what you consider to be good LARPing on an aesthetic level. So your motivation will help you create a list of actions that might be meaningful for you to pursue. But are they possible? That's a question of agency. Agency measures how much or little a person can affect a specific situation, how they can act, and whether they can change outcomes. And the player's agency isn't necessarily the same as the character's agency. Those are 2 different things.
Agency is restricted by constraints. A constraint is your understanding of your relationship to some limiting fact about the world. There are hard constraints and soft constraints. Hard constraints cannot be changed by the participants, and also they're shared by all of them. Hard constraints can be set by nature, by laws, or by common sense. For instance, humans cannot actually fly Also, we should not actually kill our co-players in combat. Hard constraints can also be design choices made by the designers that are expressed through rules. For instance, this is a non-verbal LARP. That would be a hard constraint. And then what makes them hard is that they apply to everybody, and that if you break them, people will perceive you as being outside of the fiction. Soft constraints are different from player to player. For instance, if your character wants to take off your clothes to go swimming in the river, and everyone else is doing it, but you hold back because you're afraid of others' reactions or because you feel ashamed. For you, individually, this is a constraint, and it can be just as limiting as a hard constraint. But the difference is that a soft constraint can be addressed through design, or it can also be affected internally by yourself. Perhaps the swimming could take place at night when it's darker. Or perhaps on the next day, they're swimming again, and now you trust your co-players more, and you feel less awkward about taking off your clothes. When constraints are active, they change the affordances of a situation. And affordances is what you can do and what are the costs and the risks for you of doing that thing. And this is one of those areas where we feel that designers can really help players through remembering that actions that are theoretically available to the players may not be actually possible for them to choose unless the design makes it possible for them.
We mentioned before that you're actually running multiple loops at different timescales at the same time. At the finest timescale, you run a loop that lets you manage your performance inside a scene. This is the performative loop. Here, for instance, you're deciding what you'll say next, or how long you should drag out those death groans, or how much of your character's feelings you'll allow your facial expressions and body language to reflect. This loop is so fast it's mostly unconscious. We call iterations of this loop phrases. The next time scale is the interscene scale, where you think about the scene that you want to play next and how scenes will stitch together. This is the tactical loop, and an iteration of this loop is a scene. Depending on your playstyle, you may engage in this loop more or less consciously. In the tactical loop, you'll often focus on your intention as a player and your intention as a character for a given scene. These become the goals that you use to evaluate your actions against in the faster performative loop. This means that this is also often the level where steering choices are made. The largest timescale is the whole LARP or strategic loop timescale. Iterations of this loop are acts. Here, you evaluate your goals as a player for the entire LARP or campaign. You look at the dramatic arc of your character, and so on. Your personal play strategies for playing LARPs might shape how you use the strategic loop. Some players will optimize for emotional intensity, some for narrative coherence, or some, in competitive play cultures, might optimize for winning the LARP. If you're an immersionist player, this is the level where you'll make strategic choices to enable immersive play at the performative loop level.
Again, this is all explained at some length in our chapter in this year's Solmukohta book. If you're watching this later, you can find a link in the episode info. And in fact, the whole book is on the topic of what we do when we LARP, discussing player skills from a bunch of perspectives and with a lot of hands-on practical advice about how to develop the player skills that matters to you.
We hope the concepts of the map and loop are a useful theoretical foundation for you. We think they're useful for reflecting on yourself as a player, on your motivations in play, on how you manage time and energy as you play, on any heuristics you might use, and whether there are perhaps parts of the process where you often find yourself struggling.
And if you're a designer, we hope that this model can help you design better support for prioritizing what information goes into the map and for designing actions and situations that your players will find possible, desirable, and achievable. Thank you for listening.